All right, shalom everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a book review of the book The Jew A Negro. And the reason why I'm doing this book review is because many of us make claims of our Jewish and Hebrew Israelite ancestry through biblical sources and prophecies. However, to a person who does not believe in the Bible or who doesn't look at it as credible or historical, those claims are baseless. So you would really need academia, um, scholars, historians, etc., to really make these points from their lens to give it credibility to people like that. And even if you feel like you don't necessarily have to do that, the point is still the same, that this is our history, all right, outside of the Bible. And our history has been stripped and taken from us. And it is nobody's job but our own to take our own history back. So, nonetheless, I'm going to show you some of that history that is contained in this book. This is a Jew, a Negro, being a study of Jewish ancestry from an impartial standpoint, all right, by Arthur Talmadge Abernathy. Now, a little bit about the author. He was a writer, a theologian, and poet. He pastored several churches and contributed articles in newspapers throughout the entire United States. So he was widely regarded. His education is listed here. He received his bachelor's from Rutherford College. He attended Trinity College, now Duke University, and he received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University. So these are his credentials. This gives him credibility. Surprisingly enough, this man was a Klans member. But that's okay, because in academia, it is actually good for you to have people who would be perceived as not having the same biases as you make and push the same concepts and ideas that you push. All right. Now, with that being said, I would not suggest any of you purchase this man's book or support his work. When you look up this man, he is known for having lynched a man, a black man, and then the brother of that man that they lynched fled to Canada, and Mr. Abernathy here helped to organize almost 1 million Klans members to go all the way to Canada to bring one man back to be lynched. So it gives you an idea of the character of this individual. So the first reference within this book that I'm going to highlight is on page 11. This is in the preface. The preface is like an introduction to a book. It's typically in every book, and it gives you an introduction of the author, of the justification or the reason why the author is putting the information together in this book, which indicates here. I have a picture of page 11. I'm going to start where it says the effort. All right, it says the effort of the author is to prove herein by evidence from history showing the intermingling of the Jewish race with those of other races, and these in turn with still other races together forming a miscellaneous intermingling of racial affinities, that the Jew of today, as well as his ancestors in other times, is kinsman and descendant of the Negro. I'm going to repeat that last sentence again. The Jew of today, as well as his ancestors, in other times is the kinsman and descendant of the Negro, holding the Negro's features and characteristics through the long years of racial transmutations, and I might add, in spite of the Jewish intermarriages into other races, which fact is so thoroughly established by history. So, what this man is saying, in simple terms, is in spite of the fact of the Jewish intermarrying within other races, in spite of that fact, the Jew and the Negro maintain similarities in features and characteristics. Not only that, the Jew and the Negro are kinsmen and are descendant of the same father. He goes on to say, when you flip the next page, on page 13, I'm going to start at that last paragraph, but I'm going to start a sentence before that last paragraph. All right, so it says, the original Jews were therefore dark people of the long headed type. Dark people. It says the original Jew and Negro were then descended of the same father. There goes that point again, descendant of the same father. The evidence of intermarriage, as you mentioned, is a universal phenomenon, and the close affinity between Hamitic and Semitic speech and between Northern Hamitic people and the Semites show close relationship, as you may surmise. What he is basically highlighting is the Hamites and the Semites have always had close proximity, which creates an assimilation within their culture, their heritage, etc. All right, oftentimes, so you can see similarities within the peoples. When you read on page 31, I'm going to start at around the middle toward the bottom part. I have a dash so you can see where I'm starting and ending. It says the Hamitic races, having remained stationary in Egypt, as history shows, continued as the survivals of the fittest for that region. In other words, it's very hot. The melanin helps to protect you from that region. It says to grow more and more black, while their Jewish brothers, listen to this, removing into less tropical zones in time, lost some of their tawniness. So now he describes Jews as tawny. We're going to look at that later. It says, and grew more and more into the appearance of a white man. But no climate transmigration could remove the facial and other characteristics peculiar to those two people. Now, we're going to discuss the climate part a little later, but the first thing that I want to point out is that he mentions that the Jews, some of them lost their tawniness or lose some of their tawniness. Now, what does tawny mean? Okay, when you look up the etymology of tawny, the word here means tan colored, later especially brown with dark or dull yellow orange. All right, so here's a color, a contemporary color, what tawny looks like, and you can see what it looks like if it's darker, and you can see what it looks like when it's a little lighter. I think that is pretty clear as to what the Israelites or the Jews looked like, especially in antiquity. Now, to discuss the climate point. So, in many academic sources, you will hear the theory that climate, because the Jewish people, the nation would always be traveling due to captivity and migration, because they're moving into different areas of the earth, their skin color would have changed. All right, this is the climate theory. He actually goes on to dismiss this theory on page 40. Okay, I'm gonna start where it says besides. So it says here, besides, it must be plainly denied and repudiated as demonstrated fact to the contrary that climate is entirely responsible for the fact of the Negro's darkness. In other words, it's not simply because they dwell near the equator that makes them dark. All right. It says, or the Caucasians' blindness. So it's not just because the Caucasians live in less temperate zones that make them Caucasian. All right. There are other aspects at play. It says it has been clearly shown that the Negro who has not intermarried has retained his intense darkness, even in temperate zones. And the best refutation of this old time theory is found in the Eskimo, who, although for at least 500 years reside in the Arctic region, and that where the sun only shines 6 months during the full year, still remains black, aka it's not climate that directly changes your phenotype. All right. So what is it? How do the Jews maintain this characteristic? Well, that's just because it's who they are. It's their character. It's natural to them. This is their genetic phenotype. We go on here. I'm going to start where it says Herodotus. I'm going to start at the top. It's toward the top. Herodotus, about 450 BC, that man had been in existence 25,000 years. All right, this is what the Egyptians believed. We are forced to recognize the still remaining striking similar racial characteristics of the Jewish and Negro types in their eyes, their hair. Negroes have woolly hair. So the Jews have woolly hair? Okay, interesting. Their hair, forehead, thick, sensual lips. Pause. All right, pause on that. But their thick lips. Thick lips are associated with many dark skinned races. He's saying that the Jews have these same characteristics. It says in the peculiar formations of their fingernails, and we wonder at the little differences wrought in all those long periods, notwithstanding the migrations of the Hebrew race. Studies of the Jew and Negro portraits tell their own stories best. In other words, if you're looking at a portrait of a Negro and you're looking at a portrait of a Jew from antiquity, you're looking at identical pictures. They tell their own story best. They have been selected from Negroes and Jews of the highest order and without regard to location and location of the subject selected. So in other words, it didn't matter if they took a picture of a Negro in Africa or a Jew in Europe or a Negro in Europe or a Jew in Africa. It didn't matter. The location didn't matter. The circumstance didn't matter. The migration pattern didn't matter. The intermingling didn't matter. The fact still remains that these two images of a Negro and a Jew were identical. Amazing. And this is coming from a Klans member. All right. So, in conclusion, this book clearly shows, especially from the type of person that the author was, it clearly shows that the Jew and the Negro is synonymous. It's the same individual, it's the same person. The Jew is a Negro, the Negro is a Jew.